All right, so I do want to jump right on in. Thank you again so much for everybody who has joined us. Again, my name is Chef Jeff Harris. I'm actually one of the culinary admissions demonstrators here out of the Charlotte campus of Johnson Wales University. And we are really excited to be able to host this virtual nutrition workshop today. Obviously, I love the in-person events. I love being able to connect with people. So in order to make the most out of this virtual presentation, we do encourage you to get interactive. I will be able to sort of see the chat, and two of my colleagues behind the scenes, we actually have Chef Austin Benetti and Chef Robert Penry, who will be sort of helping out behind the scenes today. So they'll be able to sort of answer and field any questions that you may have. So feel free to either type those in the chat. Feel free, if you're comfortable with turning on your video, or even chiming in with questions at certain points in times today. That is definitely welcomed. So we are going to get started off firsthand with preparing the culinary demonstration portion today. And for those of you who may have joined in after the original introduction, I will actually be preparing a Mediterranean shrimp dish. So we're going to have lots of fresh roasted vegetables. We're going to season it up. We're going to roast it in the oven, and I've prepared a turmeric scented rice. So for those of you attending live today, you should actually have the recipe already. And if you need access to that, we do have the recipe typed up. So just let us know and we'll be able to give that to you. Once we get this in the oven, we will obviously have some baking time. So at that portion, that's when we'll dive in a little bit deeper into nutrition and athletic performance and using food as fuel. So to start off, I did want to give you all a little bit of background on myself. I actually got my start in the culinary industry about 13 years ago, back when I was in high school. And back then I had no certain direction. I didn't know what specifically I wanted to do. However, I did play football in high school, and there was this Chinese restaurant that I would eat at all the time after practice. And I actually went there so frequently that I got to know the owner of the restaurant, and she is the one who offered me my first job. So I started working there after the season. The owner of that restaurant became my mentor, and she is one of the main reasons why I decided to get into the culinary industry and sort of fell in love with it. But I did decide to move down here to Charlotte back in 2011, and that's when I started my time here at Johnson Wales. So originally I was a student. I studied the culinary arts and food service management major. I had some really amazing experiences as a student here, and I'm really excited to be able to work with the university as an admissions demonstrator currently. But a couple of my highlights through my time here at Johnson Wales. During my freshman year, I actually was able to find a job through the career fair that they held on campus, and I was working for a company called Best Impressions Catering. I had a really amazing experience where they actually let me cook for a few famous people as a student. So for those of you that are familiar, I've been able to cook with, or cook dinner for President Barack Obama. We actually got to cater for the Democratic National Convention when it came to Charlotte. I was afforded the opportunity to cook for Brad Paisley and cater one of his concerts as a student. I was able to cook for quite a few NASCAR drivers at a few Hendrick Motorsports events, so including Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Jeff Gordon. And I even got to cook for a Hall of Fame quarterback at one of the events that we catered, so I cooked for Dan Marino. In addition to that, I got to explore my passions further during my internship, and I had a really amazing experience out in California for my internship. I got to do that at the restaurant at Meadowood, which is a restaurant, one of the most expensive restaurants in America, where dinner can range anywhere between $300 to $400 per person. And I did get to eat there before I left. It was one of the best meals that I've ever had. I really cherished my time there. I got to work with some really cool ingredients, from truffles to wrapping chocolate bars in gold, and even poaching potatoes in beeswax. So it was a really cool experience, and that is sort of what expanded upon my passion for nutrition. That's where I started to get really interested in sort of using nutrition for fuel. We had our own garden out there. It was a very sustainable restaurant. So that's what sort of inspired me. And with that said, I do want to jump into this recipe. I'm not sure if you all have been keeping up with nutrition recently, but the Mediterranean diet was actually voted as one of the healthiest diets according to recent scientific studies. So that is sort of where this dish is going to be inspired from. And what we're gonna start off with is just sort of trimming this asparagus. So this is gonna be the base for the dish. We're gonna cut off the woody ends of the stalks here, and we'll just lay these out on this sheet tray. Got it lined with parchment paper, so that way when we go to bake it, it doesn't sort of stick. So get that set up. We're gonna use a few grape tomatoes here. And if you are looking directly at the recipe, you may see that I have added in a few additional vegetables. So keep in mind that when you go to make this, it's okay to sort of modify that recipe. We were doing some demonstrations earlier this week, and I had a few extra vegetables left over, so we're gonna add those in. So we got the tomatoes. We're gonna use a few of these cremini mushrooms, and just make sure to slice these nice and thin. So the Mediterranean diet, for those of you that are unfamiliar, again, it's very vegetable based. They end up eating lots of healthy fats, which we'll be including today in terms of avocados and olive oil. They use some lean protein. So today this is gonna be using some marinated shrimp that I actually got on this morning, and some healthy whole grains. We're actually gonna use the turmeric rice. And we'll go with these mushrooms. We'll just sort of spread those out on the tray. We're also gonna use some red onions, which are one of my favorite ways to sort of add flavors. So we'll peel the onion here, and we'll julienne that. And the cool thing is that with a lot of these vegetables, you're getting a lot of really great nutrients that can sort of help fuel you. So we'll get a quick julienne on these. We'll spread those throughout. When you're cooking, the other cool thing about like doing recipes like this is that not only are these good for you, but you also get the appearance of the vegetables that we're using. So like when you're designing a meal for yourself, you wanna look at using the colors of the rainbow. So you'll see that when this comes out of the oven, we're gonna be using sort of all the colors of the rainbow in here. And that's a good way to make sure that you're both getting like the micronutrients and all the vitamins and minerals that you need, as well as enhance the appearance of what you're preparing. So I'm gonna use a red bell pepper here. We'll make sure to trim out the core and the seeds. And when I'm working with the red bell peppers, I always like to sort of trim out the pith here. I notice that that can have a little bit of a bitter aftertaste, so we'll take that out and we'll throw that into the compost bin. So back when I was in high school, I also, like I mentioned, I played football. I was a lineman on the team. I was, at one point in time, around 300 pounds, and it was actually that internship in California where I was out there, sort of working in the garden, sort of eating this healthy, fresh food, that I sort of started making these changes and learning that when you're cooking food that's healthy, one of the most important things is that you're able to actually make it taste good, or else people aren't gonna eat it. So in high school, I had always thought that like nutritious food was the stuff that didn't have a ton of flavor, and that dieting meant that you were eating food that didn't really taste very good. But my experience at Johnson Wales taught me that that is actually the complete opposite. And this is what we're gonna start doing in terms of flavoring this. We're gonna use things like capers, or you can use olives, and you get that brininess to sort of enhance the flavor of what you're doing. We're gonna use some lemon, and with this lemon, we wanna add some complexity of flavor. So we're gonna use both the lemon zest on the outside here, as well as the lemon juice, to work with enhancing both the aroma of the food from the zest, as well as adding a little bit of bright acidity to this dish and sort of flavor things up. This is also another great way, playing with something that is acidic, like citrus or like vinegars. where you can enhance the flavor without just adding tons and tons of salt. So if you're looking at cooking for somebody who may have something like hypertension or high blood pressure, you're able to sort of make sure that the food still tastes good. It's not super bland. So we'll just use this slotted spoon here to juice the lemon. And we will use a little bit of salt because we do want to have that balance between the acidity and the other flavors as well, but we want to sort of add minimal amounts of salt as we go along. So keep in mind that you can always add additional, but it's hard to sort of take that out once it's already in there. So from here, what I'm gonna do is mince up a few cloves of garlic. So garlic, onions, these are both really, really flavorful ingredients that are a great way to enhance your dish when you're cooking at home, or even like in restaurants cooking for people. A great way to sort of add flavor without having to rely on just using salt. So I see we got a couple of people in the chat. Awesome. Oh, I see the link for Meadowood. That is really cool. Thank you so much, Chef Marquise, for adding that in there. That is Chef Chris Costow was the one that I did my internship with. And it was a really amazing experience working with him. Definitely learned so much through working there. And being at a 3 Michelin starred restaurant like that really, really developed my knife skills and helped sort of hone those in. So when I was working there, we would be doing things like a brunoise or like my julienne, and if those knife cuts weren't sort of perfect squares for the brunoise or perfect rectangles, I would actually have to go through and do those again. So today, this dish, or like if you're making this at home, don't stress about having everything perfect. We're looking for more of consistent sizes and shapes in the vegetables that you're cutting. So that way it sort of will cook evenly when you go to put that into the oven. So once we have this garlic minced down, what we can actually do is pull out the shrimp here. And you're gonna notice that as I'm working with the shrimp, we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we are avoiding cross-contamination and keeping things as clean and as sanitary as possible. So I will grab the garlic onto this tray. We'll sort of spread that throughout. We're gonna add some paprika, some cumin, some coriander on top here. Sort of season up those vegetables. We're gonna use that olive oil, which is a sort of healthy fat, has some of the omega-3s that are really good for you. We'll add that on top. And then from here, we'll go with the shrimp. Just sort of spread throughout the vegetables. We'll give it a nice toss to sort of make sure everything's all mixed up. And these shrimp have been marinated in the same olive oil, lemon juice, a little bit of garlic, coriander, cumin, and black pepper. And from here, what we can do is get that roasting in the oven, and then we'll start on the nutrition. Oh, so the knife that I'm using, this is actually a really cool knife that I got off Amazon, and it's just a basic sort of a chef's knife, but they had a special on it. I was really excited when I found it and ordered it in. It makes a really great traveling knife. So, from here, we're gonna pop that in the oven, and Chef Vanetti, if I could get you to set the timer for me for 15 minutes. We're gonna let that bake for about 15 minutes, and then we'll rotate the tray. All right, so what I want to do next is actually jump into a discussion that's going to jump a little bit deeper into nutrition while that bakes, and then we'll come back in and we'll chop up some of the vegetable or some of the garnishes, and we'll get those ready to go, and we'll plate this up. So give me 1 second to get this PowerPoint pulled up. All right, so perfect. Here at Johnson Wales, our students are going to sort of dive right in to the culinary major, and they're going to focus in on sort of building these skills in the kitchen right off the bat. So during their freshman year, they're going to be in the kitchen for about 6 hours every other day of the week, and they're going to be jumping into things like building knife skills, learning how to build flavors in food, learning cooking techniques, everything from braising and broiling and roasting to grilling and sauteing. For those students that end up taking the nutrition lab and start getting interested in preparing sort of nutritional based cuisines, they actually have the opportunity to go in a little bit more depth, and they might decide to get their bachelor's degree in culinary nutrition. And this is one of the sort of fastest growing fields in the industry, where a lot of professional organizations are actually looking at hiring executive performance chefs. So they're looking at hiring a chef that not only knows how to make the food taste good, so that the athletes are going to stick to their diet, they're looking at making food that is going to meet the nutritional requirements that each of these athletes need. So what I want you to think about is think of like a football team. Obviously, if you're a quarterback of the football team, you have a different job and different goals than you would if you were the lineman on a football team. So one of these positions may need to be a little bit more agile, a little bit more lean. One of these positions might need to be a little bit bulkier, but obviously they want to make sure that they are able to sort of still put on that lean mass, that they're able to build that muscle and still be able to get the job done. So as a chef that's well versed in nutrition, you're able to know sort of what amount of carbohydrates should an athlete eat in order to make sure they're fueled. What amount of fats and what amount of proteins should they be getting in order to optimize their diet. So today, what I want you to first think of is, what does healthy eating look like? So earlier while I was preparing, I was talking to you about how when I was in high school, I used to think that boiled chicken and broccoli was what it meant to eat healthy. Eating plain white rice without seasoning. Eating iceberg lettuce salads all the time. So for me, that wasn't something that I could do. That wasn't sustainable. And it actually took me going to culinary school to realize that eating healthy can look more like this. Eating salmon that is well prepared. Eating a nice, rich, whole grain pasta loaded with vegetables. A salad can look like that with heirloom tomatoes and maybe a little bit of feta cheese, well garnished so it can look pretty. Maybe you're seasoning it up with some balsamic vinegar and you're adding some really great flavors to it. So one of the things that I find with nutrition is that food needs to be accessible in order for people to sort of stick to it. And I'm sure that you've all seen so many different articles out there on nutrition. You've probably seen a lot of conflicting information as well. I know that this can sort of be a tough challenge to navigate just because there's so many different conflicting views on what a healthy diet is. One of the ones that is most universally recognized as a healthy diet is actually the Mediterranean diet. So it's the gold standard. And like we were saying, it's very vegetable based, moderate amounts of protein. So it's not like you're eliminating anything specifically. You're not cutting proteins out. You're not eating way too much protein and going on like the carnivore diet where that's all you eat. It's sort of like a well-balanced diet. Lots of healthy fats, so you're not getting too many of the saturated fats from, think of like eating bacon every day or pork belly every day. Well, it's one of my most favorite things to eat. You're looking at sort of reducing the amount of saturated fats and sort of substituting those for healthier fats like olive oil, like avocados. And the Mediterranean diet can also sort of be adapted towards many different cultures. So the way that you might do that is by using different herbs or by using different spices that sort of fit the flavor profile of a certain region. But you'll find that many cultures around the world are going to sort of dive into similar structures in their diet. So if you're looking at adapting the Mediterranean diet, obviously like you have the traditional Greek and the Italian and the Middle Eastern dishes, but you may season them or cook them differently. If you're looking at cooking Asian cuisine, you might season more with like a fish sauce as opposed to using like the capers that we were using to get that brine in there. Sometimes the cooking difference might be a little bit different. You can think of like a Peruvian ceviche. So in terms of lean protein, you're getting that nice fresh fish. Maybe you're getting the sweet potatoes, so like sweet potato chips to go with it, and the chocolate, that corn. And then you're looking at consuming things in moderation. So you're not just cutting out all sweets, you're not just cutting out all saturated fats, but you're looking at sort of consuming those in moderation. So if you're looking at making the Mediterranean diet work for you, you've probably seen the food pyramid on how you should structure it. The Mediterranean food pyramid is a little bit different than the traditional food pyramid that you've seen, where like everything at the bottom is all grains. With the Mediterranean diet, you're looking at consuming more vegetables in addition to using those whole grains. As you scale up, you're looking at sort of that moderate amount of protein. It's a lot of fish that they're going to consume, a lot of seafood, and then in terms of meat, maybe some poultry, maybe some lamb, some dairy, some yogurt, and along those lines. So if you're looking at fueling an athlete, you're looking at sort of making sure that they have enough energy to make it through their game. And athletes and people that are active, you've probably heard that food is fuel. So if you're eating the right foods, it's going to lead to you being healthier. But if you're eating the wrong foods, it can also be poison. If you're living off of instant ramen every night, you're probably not going to perform at the top of your game. So there's definitely a difference between eating food just for nutrition and eating food for enjoyment. However, they don't have to be distinct. They don't have to be separate. So if your food is tasting good, if it looks good, if it's familiar, it's much easier for you to stick to a plan. One of the things that I sort of advocate against is these strict, like I'm going to count calories and I'm going to obsess over every single calorie that I consume, because depending on, you have your basal metabolic rate, the amount of calories that you consume in a day just existing, but depending on your stress levels, depending on your activity levels for the day, the amount of calories that you may need might fluctuate. It may go up or may go down. So when we're looking at making sort of nutritional cuisine more accessible, one of the things that I recommend is obviously adding things in first before you cut things out. So loading up on these fresh vegetables before you go and consuming your desserts and your sweets is going to make it much easier to sort of moderate that. Another concern that a lot of people have when they're looking at diving into nutrition is that it's expensive and it's time consuming. But as you see right now, what we just did, this recipe, it took me maybe 10-15 minutes to get all those vegetables prepared. And if you're looking at planning your meals out, maybe you spend one day on Sunday and you get all your vegetables sort of staged out. You get your mise en place, as we say in the kitchen, ready, everything in its place. And then when it's time for you to actually prepare it, you pull it out, you throw it on the tray, and you can change the seasonings. You can change the spices that you put on it, a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of citrus, and you bake it and you're good to go. So instead of thinking of your diet as a hard set rule of I have to eat this every day and I have to eat every 2 hours or every 3 hours, I want to eat 6 times a day, what you can think more of is I am eating to fuel myself. So let's talk about some of the guidelines for what you should be looking at. In terms of diets, I like to sort of think of things as percentages. So in terms of macronutrients, if you're looking at fueling an athlete, your diet should be about 55% in terms of carbohydrates. And I know a lot of you might have seen like the low carb diet fads that are out there and might be thinking that 55% is really high. But keep in mind that glucose is the preferred energy source of the body. It's what your body is able to break down and run off of most efficiently. So if you're doing something like a soccer match where you're constantly sprinting up and down the field, you want to make sure that you have enough carbohydrates to fuel yourself. But in addition to that, you should be looking at getting about 25% of your diet from protein. Obviously, protein is important to make sure that you're able to maintain lean muscle mass. And then the rest of your calories should actually come from healthy fats. So not eating tons of butter and pork belly and eggs where you're getting all of like the saturated fat and high cholesterol. I'm not saying to avoid these things, but what I am saying is that you want to make sure you're getting these healthy fats to sort of temper your metabolism. If all you eat is a candy bar before a match, yes, you're getting those carbohydrates, but you're gonna burn through those fast. If you have these healthier fats, they will sort of help to slow that metabolism down and make sure you don't burn through that energy right away. So if you're looking at fueling athletes, like we were saying, the Olympic athlete is typically gonna consume between 55 to 60% of their calories in carbohydrates. And then the protein content may vary depending on your goals. So like we were saying, around 15 to 25% is what you're gonna be looking at in terms of protein. But when you're looking at like carbohydrates, again, instead of just going for those simple sugars, eat things like potatoes and tubers, eat whole grain products, eat berries and nuts and fruits. You're gonna get carbohydrates from these, but they're not gonna be those ones that just spike your blood sugar. You burn through them, and then you're left with that crash afterwards. In terms of fueling yourself for optimal performance, we do want to think a little bit about the timing. So your body takes about 3 hours to digest a meal. So before your athletic event, you don't want to go and weigh yourself down and feel bloated as you're trying to perform. You obviously want to have that energy. So maybe about 3 hours before your meal or before your game would be the best time to actually consume your meals. You do want to make sure that you are staying hydrated. And this is another tip for you all, that obviously if you're dehydrated, one of the things that the body can do is mistake that dehydration for hunger. And you may tend to actually overeat foods because of the fact that your body's thirsty and it's craving those foods. And keep in mind, if you're eating lots of vegetables, a lot of those are a high concentration of water. So your body is gonna pull the water from those vegetables. So it may sort of mix up those signals. So you do wanna make sure you're staying hydrated. In terms of electrolytes, everyone goes for like the Gatorades and the Powerades, and those can be effective, but you wanna use those sparingly. If you're just going throughout your day, you don't wanna be drinking tons of Gatorade because you're consuming way too much sodium and you're consuming way too much of that simple sugar. If you're actually sprinting, if you're actually weight training, if you're actually using this energy and sweating a lot, you may need to replenish those electrolytes. That might be an option. But something that a lot of teams are looking at is, instead of just drinking Gatorade, what if we can make lavender infused lemonade? Or what if we can actually make something homemade that is going to replenish those electrolytes but isn't going to be overloaded with sodium and sugar, where we can sort of customize the amount that we're putting in for the athletes. You do also want to make sure that you're refueling for success. After you go through your game, your body needs to recover, it needs to repair. So when the game ends, you want to make sure that you're consuming a balanced dinner to sort of replenish all that you use. So think about something like roasted salmon with some whole wheat pasta and some marinara, some grilled asparagus, and for dessert, instead of just going for the ice cream or instead of going for the chocolate cake, what if you poach some pears with a little bit of cinnamon, and you can make your own chantilly cream or your own homemade whipped cream. And it's something that's going to satisfy you. You're going to be able to satisfy that sweet tooth without feeling like you're deprived, but you're actually consuming fruit, so you're actually getting those micronutrients that you need in addition to satisfying that sweet tooth. And again, like we were talking about, glucose is the body's preferred form of fuel. So you're gonna get about 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate that you get. And we wanna make sure that we're not just consuming simple sugars. We wanna go more for those complex carbohydrates. So the potatoes, the sweet potatoes, the whole grains, the rice, the brown rice, might all be really great options. With every single meal, you also want to make sure that you are consuming some protein. So as you're consuming that protein, that is going to help sort of moderate the digestion of those carbohydrates, so you don't just consume them and they spike that blood sugar. So give me 1 second, I'm just going to rotate this tray real quick. My timer went off. And Chef Finetti, if you could just set me another 30-minute timer, please. So you do want to sort of consume a moderate amount of protein with each meal in order to stabilize the digestion of those carbohydrates and prevent your blood sugar from spiking. On game day, keep in mind that you're going to be pretty active, and even if you are allowing yourself a few hours before the game think more of consuming a lighter protein. So don't just go for a big giant steak before you play your game. Maybe go for some poultry, some chicken, some shrimp, some fish. Even go for vegetable-based protein. So you could go for tofu instead. And that's another thing, that using some of these techniques that we're going to talk about in terms of flavoring and seasoning foods in just a minute might be beneficial for you to take tofu, something a lot of people might turn their nose up, but actually make it taste delicious. On the game day, you do want to consume a little bit of fat, but fatty foods are going to, again, slow your digestion. So you want to make sure that you're sort of moderating that before the game so you don't end up feeling sort of sluggish and like you just want to take a nap. So don't consume greasy fried foods, avoid the pizza, avoid the french fries before the game. Maybe think of another cooking method instead of eating those fried foods, and save those for a rest day or like a recovery day a few days after the game. So let's jump into talking about how you can take some of these guidelines in terms of, now you know what percentage of food you should be eating. How do we actually make this taste good and make it enjoyable for people to consume? So chefs are hard at work trying to balance flavors with smells, aromas, tastes, textures. And in terms of taste, you have sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and savory or umami are the flavors that we're looking to balance. So let's say you're cooking for somebody who has high blood pressure and you want to cut some of that salt down. Maybe you're gonna add some lemon juice. Maybe you're gonna add some seasoned vinegar, and that's gonna add that acidity, and those tastes are very, very similar. Like the receptors on your tongue for those tastes are very similar. So as you're doing that, you're not gonna miss out on the fact that you had to cut that salt down. Now, when you're looking at salt though, obviously if you're working hard, you're training hard, and you're sweating, you may need some of that salt. So adding a little bit of salt to something sweet can also help bring out the sweetness. I don't know about you, but salt on watermelon, that's something that I always did growing up. And you add just a small sprinkle of salt, and it makes the watermelon taste so much sweeter. So this might be something that you can do to enhance that flavor of sweetness and sort of help satiate yourself, so you're not just tempted to go for overly sweetened or overly sugared ingredients. So even looking at something like onions. Obviously, onions aren't something that are loaded with sugar, but if you cook them low and slow and you caramelize them in a little bit of olive oil so you get that healthy fat, you're gonna start bringing out the natural sugars and that natural sweetness of the onion, and then you can add that to a dish so you're able to sort of balance those flavors. When we're looking at actually adding like sweeteners, something like a little bit of honey goes a really long way. And honey is a more nutrient-rich sweetener than just using highly processed white table sugar. So you can take that honey and you can add a little bit of lemon juice, you can add a little bit of salt, and maybe even a dash of olive oil, and make your own salad dressing or a vinaigrette, and then you can spruce up those greens and make them tasty. When we're looking at flavor profiles, we also want to talk a little bit about what flavor is. And flavor is the art of combining all of those five: the sweet, the sour, the salty, the bitter, the savory. And you also want to look at combining that with the other sensations. So the aroma of what you're making. Maybe we take this lemon and we char it on the grill, and that's going to smell different than if I just squeezed lemon juice on your food. Maybe we take this lemon zest that I've already zested, and we're gonna sprinkle that on top at the end, and that's going to enhance the lemon aroma in addition to the lemon juice that we use to season this up. So salt is more of a flavor enhancer. It's going to bring out that sweetness. It's going to reduce the bitterness of whatever you're eating. So if you're looking at eating salad greens, they can be kind of bitter. And that might be what's off-putting for a lot of high school students. And if you add a little bit of that salt on there and you balance that bitterness with the acidity, it might make it more enjoyable for them to consume. So sweet is kind of similar to salt in terms of enhancing flavors. So it's gonna sort of round those out. I'm not saying to add a ton of sugar, but like we were saying, if you add maybe a teaspoon or so of honey to what you're making, it can sort of bring out the savoriness, the umami. It can enhance the acidity, and it tells your brain that there's energy available. So when I'm looking at using sweeteners, I'm looking at actually using real sweeteners that have carbohydrates instead of using those artificial sweeteners, because that sweet flavor is going to tell your brain that there is energy there, and you don't want to sort of throw off that balance with using a lot of these artificial sweeteners and end up to the point where like you're just consuming tons and tons of sweet, but you're not getting full and satiated from that. So sour is going to help to balance the sweetness and the salt and the spicy, and it's going to cut through fat. So think about like how people might pair a steak with a nice wine, and it sort of cuts through how heavy that steak is or how rich that fat can be. Some restaurants, like where I did my internship at, would actually do something like an intermezzo, where they would serve something like a bright sorbet between courses. And it sort of is a nice way to break up all those high-fat dishes. And then the bitter is why a lot of picky eaters might not like things like brassicas, like cabbages, like broccoli, why people may not like coffee. But what do we do with something that is really bitter like coffee? You add in some sweetener, you add in a little bit of fat, like the cream, and you sort of balance that out. So in terms of that, we can also look at adding smell to all of those tastes to enhance the flavor. And spices are one of the easiest ways to do that. So I know I mentioned like the boiled chicken and broccoli or cauliflower. What if we just took cauliflower and I threw it in the steamer, or I threw it in the pot and I blanch it, and we overcook it to the point where it's just mush, and we don't add any seasonings to it, and I serve it to you. Most of you are gonna turn your nose up and you're gonna say no. But what if I take that cauliflower and I cut it into these little florets, and we drizzle it with some olive oil, and we add a Lebanese spice blend. Maybe we add some cumin, some cayenne, some cinnamon, and we spice it up, a small amount of salt, and we roast it in the oven. And you're gonna get a little bit of that caramelization on the cauliflower, a little bit of that char, and it brings it all together. And that, for me, would be much more appetizing. And then you can also think about using one ingredient in multiple ways. And I was talking about that a second ago with the lemon, but even something like garlic. You can use fresh garlic, which as the chefs is sort of the gold standard, but that's gonna also be a little bit different from garlic powder. Or better yet, what if I took the garlic and I made a garlic confit? So I poach the garlic in olive oil and I cook it until it starts to caramelize. Or we caramelize it in the oven, and then that brings out the sweetness and sort of enhances the aroma for more of those roasted notes. So you can also use smells in order to enhance the food that you're making. In addition to that, appearance is everything. If it looks weird, I can tell you firsthand, I work with a lot of high school students. I visit, maybe about 150 high schools in a typical school year. And getting students to eat vegetables or getting students to eat something healthy, a lot of the times appearance is the number one struggle to overcome. We eat with our eyes. So when you're looking at the menu, if you're anything like me, you're going through and you're looking for the pictures, and the best looking picture is oftentimes what's going to attract your attention, what's going to make you look further. So vegetables come in all colors of the rainbow. We have the red from the bell peppers and the tomatoes. We have the orange from the carrots and the yellow from the lemons and the greens. And when we bring that all together, your eye is going to go to that. So take a look at the pasta dishes that we have in the pictures then. Do you want to eat the one on the left where it's just sort of that brown from the pasta? Or do you want to eat that one on the right where it draws your eyes to it with that visual appeal of all the colors? Another tool that you have to actually make healthy food actually appetizing is textures. So again, I was talking about that cauliflower. You can boil it to the point where there's no texture, where it's all mushy, or you could roast it. Maybe get a little bit of char on it where you get a little bit of that crispiness. Some of the tender cauliflower. Maybe we make some crunchy garlic to put on top when we roast the cauliflower till it's nice and tender, and you get that contrast in textures. Or think of a bowl of yogurt. I could serve you a plain bowl of just regular non-fat yogurt. Or what if I take that yogurt and we add a small drizzle of honey? Maybe we add some crunchy granola to that smooth and creamy yogurt. Maybe we slice up some berries and you're getting the strawberries and the blueberries, so you're getting that sort of tender texture from the fruit. And then you get all of those textures, you get those smells, you get the contrast in flavor, so the acidity from the fruit, you get the sweetness from the honey, you get that nice tart yogurt, and it all sort of comes together to make a really appetizing dish. You can also build on the texture by adding something like a nut butter, like an almond butter or a peanut butter. And then again, you're also going to get more of those omega-3s, those healthy fats that are good for your heart. And these are all things that you can use in terms of enhancing the food. Now, sound, I know, is something that a lot of you probably don't really think of when it comes to cooking. But I was actually reading, there's a book called Taste, I think it's by Barbara Stuckey. It's really interesting, and they were talking about how all of the senses come together to enhance taste. And what they did, there was a study where they were serving oysters to a group of people. And with one set of oysters that they served, they had loud, blaring rock music. With the other set of oysters that they served, they had a quiet, sort of ambient room. And then I believe it was like with the third group of oysters that they had served, they actually had sounds of the ocean playing on the radio. And they asked these people to sort of rate which oysters were the freshest. And all the oysters were the exact same. They were sourced from the same place. They were sourced on the same date. So they all had the same level of freshness. And by far, people had rated the ones with the sound of the ocean as fresher. So another thing that you might think of is going to a Latin American restaurant and they bring out the fajitas, and let me see if this works. You actually hear this sound. So take a look at that picture of the fajitas down below. When you hear that sizzling, it brings all of the senses sort of into perspective, and you're probably smelling those rich flavor profiles that you get, the cumin and the coriander, and the cilantro and the limes at that Latin American restaurant, and you hear that fajita coming out and you just get super excited knowing that dinner's on the way. So at this point, I do want to sort of turn things over and see if anybody has any questions. So Chef Finetti, with me sharing the screen, I am not seeing the chat. Do we have any questions coming into the chat box there?
No questions just yet, Chef.
Okay, awesome. So if y'all do have questions, feel free, like we said, you can unmute yourself, you can ask those, you can chime on in, or you can type those into the chat. And while we're doing that, I'm going to take a look and see how our shrimp bake is turning out. Oh man, this is looking really, really tasty here. The shrimp just need a few extra minutes, so while that is finishing down, what I'm going to do is come back over here and we'll start working with some of these ingredients to get the garnishes ready to go. So we're going to throw this lemon zest into this portion cup here. We'll use that in just a second. I also want to add in some avocado. So what I'm going to do is just sort of cut the avocado in half. We'll twist it. We will remove the pit. And then what I like to do when I'm working with avocados is dice them in the shell. I found that leaving it in the shell until you're ready to use it is beneficial because it helps to prevent the avocado from oxidizing, leaving that bottom half of the avocado sort of not exposed to the oxygen. So we can dice this in the shell, and then once that shrimp is done, we'll scoop it out with a spoon and garnish there. So again, we're adding those healthy fats, we're adding the complexities of flavor. I'm gonna use some fresh oregano today as well, which, as we were talking about those aromas, there is a marked difference between using a fresh herb and a dried herb. And in my experience, the fresh herbs always win. So in a pinch, if all I have access to is dried oregano, I've been on the road before and had demonstrations that I've had to get done where you go to the grocery store and the herbs just aren't as fresh as you would like. So sometimes you do end up making those substitutions. But I find that the complexity of the aromas in a fresh herb is always much more enjoyable than those dried ones. If you're looking at doing these substitutions at home, a general rule for you would be about a 3-to-1 ratio. So there's 3 teaspoons and a tablespoon. So if you're gonna use a tablespoon of fresh oregano, that'd be about the equivalent of a teaspoon of dried oregano, because obviously as you're drying it out, you're removing some of the water content, and it is sort of concentrating all that down. From here, we're also gonna use some cilantro, one of my other favorites. I believe that my recipe calls for parsley, and I decided to actually substitute that out for the cilantro because the cilantro itself actually has a much sort of richer aroma to it. So what we're gonna do is compact these up, and we will mince these, and then we'll use those as the garnish at the end to sprinkle on top, and we'll be adding some additional color as well as that rich aroma to the flavor of what we're making. So one other thing that I did want to talk to you about is like some of the possibilities for somebody who's going into nutrition. So I do speak with a lot of students, and they always think like if you're studying culinary arts, the big option for you would be to go and work inside of a restaurant. And obviously that is one of the largest opportunities for somebody going into culinary arts, is being a chef in a restaurant. But if you add this nutrition background sort of to your degree, it opens up so many other options. And a lot of our graduates are doing some really cool and exciting things. One of my roommates, when I graduated, he actually decided to move up to Detroit. And after graduation, he had a job working with Andre Drummond, who at the time was the center for the Pistons in Detroit. And with athletes, we're talking about how they understand that food is fuel and food can help them perform better. So he was actually hired on as a personal chef, and he got to cook at Andre's house and travel with the team. In addition to that, a lot of professional organizations are realizing that Johnson Wales alum, not only do they have that knowledge on how to make the food taste good, they also know how to work with the dietitian and plan out the meals. They're gonna fit those requirements that we were talking about. So the Clippers out in LA, their executive performance chef, graduated from Johnson Wales the same year that I did. The chef for the Bears in Chicago is also a Johnson Wales alumni. And one thing that I do want to show you real quick before we jump into this plating, I actually have a video. It's an alumni story. Chef Donna McCain, she is working with Clemson University, and she is in charge of cooking with the team. And I think they do some really exciting events as well. Things like culinary demonstrations for the athletes so that they can take that responsibility, that they don't always have to hire a chef to cook for them. They can make food that's going to be delicious and nutritious. So give me 1 second to pull this up. And I'll let you all watch that while we get the shrimp out of the oven.
I'm Donna McCain. I'm a Johnson & Wales alum. I'm the executive performance chef at Clemson University with the football team. My day-to-day operations include communicating between the dietitian and our other performance chef, who's another Johnson & Wales alum, making sure the guys get everything they need in the food that we serve them. I'm fortunate for the time that I spent in Johnson & Wales and all the skills that I picked up and the knowledge because I use it every single day. We're talking about changing cooking methods and always trying to increase the nutritional value of any food that we put on the line for our players. We also do a lot of cooking demos. We have a weekly one with the guys, and they get to choose what it is, and we'll set it up for them and make sure they get their hands on food and they start learning the skills that they need to be successful. And I always tell them, you know, private chefs are expensive, so if we can teach them and teach them life skills, that's how we can be the most impactful. I think I would tell the Johnson & Wales students, don't lose your creative spirit when you get out into the world, or say you are cooking for a team in the South. They might not have that mature palate yet, but understand that once you create those relationships and they trust you, that you'll be able to drop a little quinoa in here or impact them in a different way. Always understand that you have to create your own opportunity. I was the first executive performance chef to be hired on by a university. So know what you want to do, have a passion for it, and don't let somebody tell you that you can't do it, because you can always create your worth.
All right, so I think that was a really great example of what is possible for somebody who's well versed. Actually, one second. Let me. There we go. Stop the videos. Perfect. So I think that's a really great example of what is possible when you have that background in food and you have that background in nutrition. So the next thing that we're gonna do, we actually have this really delicious baked shrimp ready to go. And you'll see that I do have the turmeric rice here. So I sort of cook that in the pilaf method. That is included in the recipe. Just a little bit of onions and garlic. We sauteed that up. We added the turmeric in there, and then we cooked the rice in the oil for just a few minutes before adding in a delicious chicken broth. So instead of using water, we were talking about building flavors. We used the chicken broth in order to enhance that flavor of the rice. And I decided to go with the turmeric rice because not only is turmeric a really delicious flavor, but it also is an anti-inflammatory. So if you're looking at cooking for athletes, it's one of those great ingredients and those tools that you can use to sort of help speed along their recovery and reduce the inflammation after a hard training session. From here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna try and build a little bit of height with these asparagus. We're gonna make sure to garnish with the red bell peppers, get some of these tomatoes throughout. So you're gonna see that this is gonna be a rich, sort of colorful dish. We're building the textures with it. Make sure we get some of those mushrooms as well, which a cool thing about mushrooms, I know y'all have probably heard recently in terms of like optimizing your immune system health. This is something that's like all the rage these days. So two of the most important vitamins and nutrients that you can get for your immune system are actually vitamin D and vitamin C. So one of the cool things about eating sort of fatty fish and seafood, as well as mushrooms, is that those are both natural sources of vitamin D. And something you might also have heard in terms of vitamin C is obviously oranges are high concentration of it. But bell peppers and red bell peppers specifically are actually a even better source of vitamin C than oranges. So eating something like this allows you to get a lot of the nutrients that are going to sort of help optimize your immune system as well as prepare you for performance. From here, we'll just do a quick little lemon zest garnish on top of the shrimp there. We'll get some of this feta crumbles put on top. And then we'll finish off with some of those fresh herbs and avocados, and we are good to go. And we have a dish here that's gonna be really, really rich, really flavorful, sort of combining all of those tools for taking healthy food and making it taste great. And yeah, I think that's in the camera there so you can get a good view of what's going on. So I just put on some feta cheese. That's what the white garnish was. Just some feta cheese crumbles. And again, that's another great way to like think about salt. Obviously, feta is a pretty salty cheese. So when I was making this dish, taking a look at like what I'm actually adding in there. So I didn't add a ton of salt onto the vegetables themselves, but brightening them up with a little bit of that feta is gonna add some additional salt, and brightening them up with that acidity is also going to help sort of bring out those flavors of the vegetables. So from here, let me take a quick look. I'm just gonna bring this PowerPoint back up. If you all have any questions, we are excited to answer those now. And I wanted to put something up real quick in case any of you are actually interested in getting more information from Johnson & Wales. You can text Wildcats to the number there, you can scan the QR code, or you can also visit that website. If you're interested in sort of checking out some of the events that we have, we will have some virtual cook-along events going on. There's a lot more information in terms of the nutrition programs and majors and resources that we have out there for students. So if you're interested, definitely go ahead and use this slide here to sign up for more information and to keep in contact with us. And I also wanted to share my contact information as well. So if any of you do have questions, if you lose a copy of the recipe and you need it again, if you need access to the PowerPoint or something along those lines, feel free to reach out via the contact information there. And hopefully we will actually be resuming travel again, so maybe I will see you in your classroom. If you're interested in keeping up with my travels once we're able to do that again, please give me a follow on Instagram. It's at Chef Jeff on the road. And feel free to reach out via that if you have any questions, comments, concerns as well. So again, I did want to say thank you all so much for tuning in today. We had a really great time hosting you here at the Charlotte campus of Johnson & Wales, and hope to see you all in the future as well.